There's really no other way to say it. World War II was, without a doubt, the largest and most destructive war in all of human history. It was a conflict that completely redrew the world map, and honestly, it reshaped the entire course of the 20th century. And to even begin to grasp its impact, we have to start with the human cost.
Just try to wrap your head around that number. Somewhere between 60 and 80 million people lost their lives. It's a figure that's so staggering it's almost impossible to comprehend. And that right there, that sets the stage for the immense, unbelievable stakes of this global catastrophe.
So, the big question is, how? How on earth did the world plunge into such a devastating war? Well, the answer, and this might surprise you, it really begins at the end of the war that came just before it.
Yeah, the seeds of this new war were sown in the unresolved conflicts of the last one. So let's take a look at the key things that really set the stage for this absolute disaster.
It all started with this lingering resentment. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, was so harsh that it left Germany feeling humiliated and just economically shattered. This instability created the perfect storm for extremist movements, and that led directly to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, who promised to make Germany great again, mostly through aggressive expansion.
And here's the part that's truly chilling. This violent ideology, it wasn't a secret. It was right there from the very beginning. As early as 1923, in his book Mein Kampf, Hitler wrote clear as day that a future war would result in, and I quote, the extermination of the Jewish race in Germany. The warning signs were all there.
And that brings us to this absolutely crucial concept, Lebensraum. It's German for living space. This wasn't just some political idea for Hitler. It was a core belief. He thought the so-called pure German race needed more territory to expand, and he was convinced that war was the only way to get it. This idea became the fuel for his entire plan of conquest.
So, with these ideas driving everything Germany was doing, the world was basically on a collision course. It was no longer a question of if a war would start, but simply when.
And this timeline here, it shows just how fast those last moments of peace disappeared. First, you have this shocking pact between Germany and the Soviet Union, where they secretly agreed to just carve up Poland between them. Then, boom, September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades. Just 2 days later, Britain and France make good on their promise to defend Poland. And just like that, World War II had officially begun.
In those early days, Germany seemed absolutely unstoppable. They unleashed this terrifying new type of warfare called Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. Using these incredibly fast, coordinated attacks with tanks and planes, they just tore through Western Europe. By 1940, they'd overwhelmed Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even France.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just a European war. Oh no. The conflict was expanding, and fast. It was creating two huge, distinct theaters of war that would soon stretch across the entire globe.
So let's break this down. You basically have two main fronts. Over in Europe, the main aggressor is Nazi Germany, and it's mostly a land and air war. But then, over in the Pacific, you've got Imperial Japan stirring up trouble. That conflict was mostly fought at sea and in the air, and it would eventually pull the United States in as its main opponent. And the one event that officially dragged the United States into this massive global conflict was the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. That attack on the U.S. naval base completely galvanized a very hesitant American public. After that, there was no doubt about it. This was now, truly, a world war.
For the first couple of years, it really did look like the Axis powers, that's Germany, Italy, and Japan, had the upper hand. They seemed unstoppable. But starting around 1942, the momentum began to shift, and pretty dramatically, in favor of the Allies.
You can really point to three absolutely critical battles that turned the tide. First, Stalingrad, where the Soviet Union stopped the German advance cold, in what became the single bloodiest battle of the war. It was a crushing defeat for Hitler. Then, in the Pacific, the Battle of Midway crippled the Japanese Navy. And finally, of course, D-Day, the massive Allied invasion of Normandy that opened up that desperately needed second front and began the liberation of France.
So, with the Axis powers now retreating on all fronts, the war entered its final, and you could argue, its most devastating chapter.
In Europe, the end came pretty quickly. After their last-ditch offensive, the Battle of the Bulge failed. Germany was getting squeezed from both sides, the Allies from the west and the Soviets from the east. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops closing in on his bunker in Berlin, Hitler died by suicide. Just about a week later, Germany officially surrendered.
But the war in the Pacific was still raging.
U.S. military planners were looking at a ground invasion of Japan, and they were predicting absolutely catastrophic casualties. Faced with that grim calculation, President Harry Truman made the fateful decision to use a terrifying new weapon that had been developed in total secrecy, the atomic bomb. And the final act of this 6-year global war unfolded with terrifying speed. August 6th, the first atomic bomb is dropped, and it completely obliterates the city of Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, a second bomb hits Nagasaki. Faced with this unbelievable level of destruction, Japan surrendered. On September 2nd, 1945, World War II was, finally, over.
The fighting might have stopped, but the war's impact would cast a very, very long shadow over the entire world. It created a completely new political order, and it came at an almost unbelievable human cost.
And to really understand the tragedy, you just have to look at this. The number of military deaths was enormous, of course, but look at the number of civilian deaths, more than double. This wasn't a war that was just fought on battlefields. It was a war that brought destruction to cities, to towns, to people's homes, on a scale we'd never seen before.
In the end, the world was just fundamentally changed. The full horror of the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis and their collaborators, was revealed to the world. And in an effort to make sure a catastrophe like that could never happen again, the United Nations was formed. But at the same time, a new kind of rivalry popped up between the two new superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, kicking off what we now call the Cold War.
You know, when you look at it, our modern world was really born from the ashes of that war. Its institutions, its alliances, even its deepest fears were all shaped by this conflict. Which, of course, leaves us with one final and very important question. Have we truly learned its lessons?